very brightly colored and it's very loud, and it's fun for a while.
We want to be free to do what we want to do.
Muhammad Ali and Sonny Barger, the president of Hell's Angels.
This is 1095. Last catch up, probably a year or so ago. But you've now been in Australia for 2 years, right?
Yes, and I always the first podcast is always a funny marker for me because it was a very useful reflection on all of my work for some time, and my work in the theatre, right, and using theatre with NGOs and refugee communities, and then shifted into corporate and all that. So it's interesting that we had that conversation, and we mentioned this weird thing called COVID. It had just bubbled up, right? Okay. And yes, and I was on my way to Singapore, and some people were like, "Oh, have you heard about this kind of like this thing? Don't go there." And I was like, "No, I have to go." And plus, Singapore's good at this stuff, right? So it's kind of interesting. It all began there, and then shortly after that, I was here in Australia, Fortress, Australia. And that's it. So, I mean, we've done one more since then where we
we chatted about silence, I think, on the second one, because that was a technique that you were using to teach people in leadership, maybe, if I'm right, around understanding silence and the importance of, when we say silence, what the space between conversation, between words, and giving space and stuff, which that was pretty interesting.
And it's kind of interesting that while we were thinking about it too, kind of in a meditative space, related to Buddhism and our life in Chiang Mai, and then communication in the corporate world, which was why I was on my way to Singapore doing that. Interestingly, on Tuesday, I will incorporate a specific body of that work into another training that I now do since I've been here in Australia, which is actually on conflict resolution. So since then, I've become an accredited mediator.
That sounds and conflict resolution in a professional corporate sense, or in an individual personal relationship sense?
Well, because I got stranded here. So this is kind of what's changed. Well, I mean, I guess one of the biggest things that's changed, right, is that I have literally shifted my life from living in Chiang Mai and being uber mobile. My last corporate gig on sort of airwaves was for Harvard Business School, and I flew to the Shangri-La resort in Oman, and I delivered like a day there with some people from an extremely well-moneyed bank. It was actually, I think it was the Royal Bank of Kuwait, actually. So I was doing this kind of stuff, and then here I am on the ground in static in Canberra. So I think what's changed is massively is the difference between movement and stasis. Yeah. I have not been this still, literally, Matt, for decades. And we couldn't even, the ACT, right, the Australian Capital Territory, some people don't know, is an island inside New South Wales, and we haven't even been able to leave our island.
Wow, so you've not even been cross state borders then? Okay.
Barely. There was many, many months where we couldn't, and we've just had another lockdown which ran for about 4 months where we were allowed out an hour a day and so forth. Yeah. But now the vaccination rates are so high that they've kind of let it run, and we can go into New South Wales. I'm going to Melbourne in a couple of weeks' time, and it's the first time in 2 years. My brother lives here in the same country. I haven't seen him. So we've really been sort of here static. Or out of all of this stuff, people being stuck, right? Stuff like domestic violence, conflict, it's become a really big thing in people's lives, and it's affected by their mental health. So I didn't have a particular plan to do this, but my husband obviously has networks here in Canberra, in corporate, and it crosses from corporate to the NGO governance space here, obviously, given that we're in the state capital. So there's for a small kind of for a town with a big institution here, it has these weird sort of intersections. But one of them is that I now work for my company here, Narrative. We partner with conflict resolution services. So I became an accredited mediator, and what that means is that our clients, our participants, come from the police force, they're lawyers, conciliators, they deal with complaints, child protection, teachers, university lecturers, and managers of all kinds. People really, really sort of desperate to learn better ways to manage conflict at work and in life. So this on Tuesday, I'll be with my colleague there, who is a very experienced mediator, and so we run the training together. But he'll incorporate quite a lot of silence into that as part of communication and its role in conflict.
What are you seeing? I mean, from a data perspective, what do you know a lot about? We're all hearing, because of lockdown, there's been a lot more domestic violence. Is that a fact? Do you know the numbers on it? Like, are you seeing kind of real?
Yeah, that's a good question. Not yet. I think those inquiries are going to be ongoing, and it's also been strange. I think it's kind of what's changed. It's strange when you talk to people in different parts of the world, their experience of the pandemic. But I think some people seem to think that Australia, they shut their doors and that was it. We've just been roaming around as if nothing was happening. But we haven't. I mean, there were restrictions, and because it's I've never lived in a federal state before, right? So that's been a very interesting experience, because you really actually living in a series of countries because they have so much, so I think from state to state in Australia, the situation has varied, and people are still working out what that is. I think overall, everybody's very conscious that there's been some major impacts on people's mental health.
Yeah.
But I think that's what's changed there, is that that's a useful conversation. Now, like, it's suddenly much easier, I think, to talk about. It's a more ordinary conversation. And I mean, I think this is what we want with conflict, because conflict is an ordinary thing. It's an everyday thing. But it's one of those strange sort of facets of human life that people are really uncomfortable with too, and often don't know how to manage very well. So, developing the skills to manage it are really important. And it's connected to, obviously, our mental health and well-being too. So, yeah, I think that's kind of interesting, right? Those kind of conversations are much more common now, and actually easier, I think, to have.
I hadn't really considered it when you say that, actually. Like, before all of this, there was a real push, which was great, to make mental health a more comfortable conversation, and one that people can have without feeling kind of the light is on them. So it was kind of happening anyway. But yeah, I hadn't really considered the fact that because of probably a number of people that may not have dealt with mental health issues, dealing with them because of lockdown, because of this massive odd change in societal procedure, if you want to call it that. Yeah, it probably has resulted in mental health being a much more, dinner table conversation that anyone can have. And yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I think, while we have suffered more isolation. I think, I don't know, but I think certainly amongst my own community and networks, people are much more likely to pick up the phone, get on a Zoom call or get on some sort of comms call and say, I'm just losing it here. Can you talk to me? I'm sorry, I haven't been able to talk to you. I lost it for a while. I went down a rabbit hole and I've only just coming back out again. So many people have sent me messages like that or told me things like that.
I remember you just reminded me of something we chatted about. I don't know if it was on a podcast or just in a conversation, but when I think it was about a year in, during the initial process of lockdown, people had this, resilience based on, this will end at this point in time. We then got to a point where there didn't seem to be an end in sight. And I think you sent me some kind of psychological paper on this. Like there's this condition where when you do not know there is an end to something, it can create a psychological issue because you don't even you can't plan around it. And that is when you start to get, much more, a much larger wave of mental health kind of issues or just, personal stress around the situation, right? Do you remember that?
Do you know, and I do now, you brought it up because I had forgotten about it. And I think it was something like uncertainty fatigue.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
If that wasn't the word for it, then it should be.
It sounds right. We'll go with that.
We'll go with it. But it's interesting because we would talk about, what our sort of interests and backgrounds in terms of living in and amongst sort of Buddhist society. We talk about impermanence and the ever-changing nature of all things. And this is a really good for me. I've been very static in Canberra, in suburbia, after nearly 20 years in North Thailand, right? So it's a real shock culturally, like the kind of necessary sort of whiplash. I sometimes feel like I'm back in the 90s, or when I left the UK. There's these kind of comparative sort of affective experiences I have, but but we come to it with that idea that we know everything is always changing. What's changed? Well, everything has changed, and it always will. That's the other thing. Is like, why is this moment of change more important than any other? Yes, there are certain kinds of. We talk about the ideas of global awarenesses, but I mean, like a lot of the people that I know and work with, and the communities I work with, they still don't have access to the internet. Like,
really? What? Like, where? Who are you talking about?
Yeah, so I've just finished writing a report on this 5 years I worked on this project in Chin State in Western Myanmar, right on the border there.
Yeah,
and there were lots of villages where this play was about safer migration. So on the one hand, there's no work. So half the people in the state go out. They migrate for opportunities to make money and for work and so forth. But they're also living in places where you would drive in and the driver will say, if you want to make a call, you need to do it now, because once we go over this ridge, there'll be no reception. So I mean, I guess there are not so many places now in the world, and Myanmar, obviously things have changed recently too, and those places that I was accessing and we were bringing theatre to for like touring theatre, like it was a completely new thing for people. Those places, lots of those things can't happen now since the coup, since recent coup. So that's really, really changed massively there. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. I kind of feel like I've gone off piste a bit now. We were talking about uncertainty fatigue, but yeah, I mean, like my colleagues are all suddenly, a lot of them are refugees that had to leave. So I say everything changes, but I guess it's these intensities, right? I don't know, how do you feel about it?
I don't know. It's weird, that like the last couple of years has been definitely, for me personally, it's been the strangest couple of years ever that I can ever remember. And I say a couple of years because I really hope we come to the end of it, but I really don't know. And I was going to ask you this. I mean, in terms of Australia, though, it's very strange looking at Australia from an outside perspective, because it does seem like the severity of the reaction in Australia, and it seems there's been a massive polarization there, definitely, as well, in terms of the people who think this, we've got to just be back to normal, and the people who are like, give me another vaccine shot, give me shot number 5, and lock me in my house. It seems there's a real massive polarization of those two attitudes. And are you guys, can you go out now in ACT? Are restaurants open?
Yes, we can.
And the question, let me finish the question, because the question I'm going to ask is, if you can, are you finding there's been because we're talking about change, has there been a cultural shift in terms of people actually just not wanting to now because they're so used to sitting at home?
Oh, I think, I don't know anyone, because I've got, like you and I have got networks that really do stretch all the way around the world.
Yeah.
And I don't know anyone anywhere who hasn't said it's not the same. I either feel strange, uncomfortable, frightened, or guilty about going out. I mean,
wow,
I think
those are not very positive. In terms of,
and I think that is all, and I haven't, because since you've asked it, I hadn't really been able to associate a word with the feeling I sometimes have. And there's a discomfort, a dis-ease when I'm out sometimes. I was just in the pub here, at the Kingston pub, having a lunch with one of my very good Australian local friends I made in the last couple of years. We worked together on her sort of bestie. So, I mean, it's really sort of a sudden, there I am in the pub. It's Friday, getting ready for Christmas. It's packed. You know, we're having something with chips. And, you know, I'm with these two sort of like white Aussie women in their 50s, you know, talking about, what's been going on and what's coming up. Because, things have changed and it's the first Christmas where we can sort of, and we're trying to plan for what we're going to do and what can we do, what can't we do. So we were having that kind of conversation. So it's extremely sort of different sort of scenario to what I think about, like, when we would be sitting together in Chiang Mai. But I think most people I know, I think guilt, it's really interesting that guilt is an emotion that you feel.
Where does that come from? I certainly don't feel that in that scenario. Where does that? Where do you think that's triggered from? What do you think that's based on?
Because it's this kind of interesting. I mean, if you're going to talk to someone about martial arts, I know you're going to, then like body discipline, obviously, is a really big part of that. But I think that this whole thing with the social distancing and
that makes
not
sense.
Things like where I'm quite tactile, and I'm also now in a country where there's all kinds of regulations and compliances and restrictions, and there's been this whole kind of horrible surfacing of different types of abuse and sexual abuse in the parliament. Like, there's been lots of stories coming out about that. And so, but that whole thing about where, you don't sort of lean in to give anyone a hug, right? There's this whole thing of disciplining the body around different kinds of restraint. So I think that it's just going out and being in around lots of people in a social space and without a mask. So we have been able to go out more recently, and just in the last sort of couple of weeks, we're not wearing masks in public and indoors anymore. In New South Wales, you still need to wear a mask indoors, and it's slightly different. The vaccination rate in Canberra we're about 97.5% or something. So it's a slightly different scenario, but it's just, you're right. It's a strange way, and I think it's like, that's frightening, right? Because I have that. A lot of people, I think I know, have that question: like, will our social lives ever be the same again? And the sense of loss and grief, I think, is
very interesting when you talk about. I think very fortunate where I live. It's been tough, but yeah, like it's also not affected things in that way as we come out of it, which it seems we are, touch wood. It seems like Pie's got busy in the last couple of weeks. It's really nice to see people able to open bars or not quite bars, but everyone's got a restaurant license now to deal with that legality. But on a totally different topic, we're talking about change. You professionally, you deliver workshops. Your life before this was all about standing in front of people physically in a location, teaching them. You've totally pivoted to, have you or not? Are you doing everything via Zoom and online and everything now?
Yeah, well, I have. And it's kind of interesting. And we're moving off, but there was kind of a connected point I just was thinking about, because I'm also in the process of my immigration application, like leaving Australia as a temporary resident is not a good idea, because as we know, the borders have been shut. And even for people with permanent residency and who are citizens, getting back in has been extremely difficult. Right? So I would not dare leave.
I hate that. So one thing I hate that thought of not wanting, that inability to kind of leave, or that fear of leaving because you might not really get back. to where you
and
live.
that's when I talk about stasis is hard. And I've got two very aging parents who are alone in the UK, right? So, and they need help, so it's hard. And I'm also divorced from my community in Chiang Mai. I left not knowing that I was never coming back. I left with a bag. I thought I had a ticket home to Chiang Mai 3 weeks later, and that was 2 years ago.
Wow. I mean, I know you're settled there, but is that been forced out? Or has it been, whatever the expression is? What's the expression? Something creates innovation. Anyway, lack of choice. Yeah, I can't remember what the expression is.
Well, the corporate word is, I think they like to say you pivot.
Well, that's why I used that word a minute ago. But in terms of your life situation, was it just, hey, this is what I got to deal with, so now I'm going to stay? Or was it kind of, oh, great, this is the choice I'm going to make?
I think that this is where you lean into your Buddhist.
Necessity drives innovation. That's what I was looking for.
Well, okay. And I kind of think that you have to go, well, okay, I need to let go. I realize now, I recognize how much inspiration and guidance you get when you live in a place where everyone around you is practicing the same stuff, because they're not here. Right. And I also didn't realize that there's, for example, the Catholic faith is a lot more powerful here, and particularly in the suburb where we live. It's famous for having big families, right? So it's really different. So yes, but I had to pivot, and people laugh about it because I do teach still all around the world, but I do it from here, and I do it here, and I do it standing up in the laundry. Because that's where you deliver your. It's got a nice countertop, and I've got a speaker stand with my computer on top of that, and I have a nice white wall behind me with my ring lights, and I can do my flip charts and my performance. I mean, my communication training. So I do, and I think that I did pivot to doing that online, and a lot of people have. We've had to, but if you also look at the intersections, it's interesting, this stuff, isn't it? Because what's changed is, the whole thing around climate change has been fascinating because of the pandemic. Bombay full of flamingos, and Venice full of fish and absent tourists, and all these kinds of things that have happened. And we're going through this massive, there's so much rain here right now. Most Australians I know have said, I've never seen this much rain in Australia in my entire life. And the kangaroos will come down the hillside on the back of our house, and it's super, super green and full of meadow flowers. It's very beautiful. But so this whole thing is we've learned, and we also know after Glasgow, this stuff, it can't go on. It's we've got to stop. We've got to stop punishing the planet, right? And it's demonstrated, we've had a window of opportunity to say, wake up, you idiots. It's this thing can heal itself if you will just let it, if you will leave it alone, right, for a moment. And we've had these kind of sort of moments of sort of being able to sort of see this. And I think that, of course, working online, not running massive office blocks with electricity and air conditioning, not, and I was in the air a lot, and so not flying everywhere is a really good idea for the planet. So it's different working online, but, and some people don't like it. Some people have adjusted to it. I did some face-to-face training, mediation training, a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And it was the first time I think anyone had been in that situation for quite a long time. And the level of relationship that was created in the room was phenomenal.
Yeah, there you go. I mean,
it was a really diverse group, and it was beautiful. At the same time, I am working with groups of young people doing storytelling around diversity and inclusion for a very large financial services institution in the UK. I work very late at night. I haven't worked with young people in the UK for more than 20 years. I was a young person when I left. I was 27. I'm 47 now, right? So, it's given me a chance to connect with my home. And that would not have been possible. They would never have, the company I work for would have just put someone else in that gig, someone in the UK.
That's
changed.
It's fascinating because actually, I think at the beginning of this, you think, oh, if you're doing a job like you're doing, oh, it's crippled. You're never going to be able to, it's going to destroy your business. But for most people I spoke to, it's actually ballooned their businesses because once everyone got used to the fact, well, you can just connect online, it meant you can work anywhere at any time and cut down on travel costs and everything else. So, but can you do conflict resolution via Zoom? That's an interesting one.
Well, the answer to it is yes. Yes, you can. Because everything needs to happen. If you're not allowed to meet and you can't because there's a public health risk, then telecommunications is one of the main resources for dealing with that. So we teach mediation processes in the room, and we also teach it online. And we went, actually, the first new course we ran, and we were using theatre skills to do it, it was online. And we had participants from all around Australia. See, that's what's really nice, is you get people from all the different states. It's an early start for people in Perth, because they're a little bit, they're sort of like on the similar to Indonesia, the time zone, right? They're a good chunk of time behind the East Coast. So, but yes, you can, so it's just, but the way we have to look at things like our non-verbal communication, body language. How do you read that? And the difference between, to be demonstrative, me thinking I'm looking at you now, and you experiencing me looking at you now. And me thinking I'm looking at you now, but you feeling me actually looking at you because I know where my camera is. So people training to be mediators are not expecting to come into a virtual room with someone with a background in performance and saying, you need to look in your camera when you say that.
It's really interesting. I mean, obviously I'm constantly online, constantly on calls, working online, but I've not really thought about, when I go back and look at some of my recordings, I'm looking at you, but I'm not, because I'm not looking at my camera. So do you train yourself to look at your camera when you're speaking? So you're getting direct eye contact with the person at the other end?
Well, when you, and this is interesting about your martial arts conversation, because I'm very interested if he's been teaching martial arts online, right?
It's the Kung Fu school, so it's a physical location.
So it's local, because it's just kind of like, what does that mean? Because people have had to sort of make theatre online, and that's something else. I've just done a whole series of performance events online over the last year. One of the things that the guys I work with, who we do coaching, right, communications coaching, is you can take, I normally take a piece of blue tack and I stick it up by the camera, and it reminds me where to look. But if you go back and look at this video of our call now, you'll probably see that I've spent quite a lot of the time looking into the camera and not looking at the screen like this. There'll be a mix of it. But I think that my body has become disciplined now, because I teach it and I do it every day. But I've become I've retrained myself to look into the camera a lot more.
I need to train myself to do it, because I realize as I do it now, it's probably a lot more engaging on your side. But also, I do wonder whether Apple will now, at some point, release a feature or embed a camera, because cameras are getting cleverer and cleverer. And if you embedded the camera in the middle of the screen in a way it can't be seen, then it would improve the online connection experience, definitely. So yeah,
I think if you could read your eyes, it could track the movement of your eyes, for example, and that it would really change that for people. So it's interesting how I've taught that. I did some lovely training with the Indonesian government. Also, it was mediation training. Really, really interesting. So I think, when you start to sort of teach stuff around conflict and communication, you put those two things together and you start to get an opportunity to kind of facilitate, train, coach on it across cultures. You're very lucky, because you get a chance to keep learning stuff, right? So I think that's been good. Another thing that happened because of the online space, and as is that I also, of course, I got a PhD, right? I'm a doctor, but and I use it quite a lot here because I think people don't take theatre, or probably me, seriously. Sometimes it's my own fault, but we were running. I've got with a couple of my colleagues. We call each other froligs, right? We are friends and we are colleagues, right? So we call each other froligs, right? And that we kind of did some work together in the Philippines 3 years ago. We've known each other for a long time, and we co-convene a working group for an organisation called Performance Studies International. It's an academic kind of organisation, and we were going to host some events in Croatia, and the pandemic stopped it, and then the conference was moved, and then it was cancelled again. And what we did was our theme that we were working on was neighbourhoods, and we just put it online. So we ran the theme, and we invited everybody who was supposed to give a panel and said, rather than just doing your papers, why don't we just meet once a month and start talking about what we were going to do and what our situation now means. We think about it differently or change it. And honestly, Matt, it was brilliant. You know what happened? So we had we basically had an online festival where we had about 10 different performance events. People from the original conference came, and they did all these different performance events and presentations online, and it was free and everyone was invited. And we've now got an archive of all of them. And it was really beautiful, actually. Some of the work, there was dance, there was puppetry, there was storytelling, we had a blind theatre group from India.
Wow.
There were some presentations around their work.
Did you make that public? Is this all public content? Is it then, or can people check this out, or was it just done as a kind of internal workshop?
No, well, it's kind of public. I mean, all you need to do is you need to be a member of PSI, Performance Studies International, and they made a special rate. I think that it was kind of a $5. It's normally more than that. But I think they were letting people join for $5 just to make it accessible. But the membership has gone up. But I've been fabulous for our working group. Like, we've got these, and we were constantly meeting these people from all around the world. So we would, it was very late at night here for me, and it was very early in the morning for, Maria and Melissa in Argentina and Brazil. But we were together all the time, people everywhere in between, the Philippines, London, Chicago, all over. And it was just a really brilliant sort of process of getting together and, making a creative space online and letting people show up there. And it kind of, the idea, we were talking about neighborhoods, and all of a sudden this idea of the virtual neighborhood and as a planetary idea, it just became real, almost physical, because we were with each other all the time. And so it was kind of interesting, because Buenos Aires is like, one of the women was in Buenos Aires with a small child in an apartment block. It was like for a period, it was the most locked down city in the world. But what a lot of people don't realise is that it got overtaken more recently by Melbourne.
Really?
Melbourne was the most locked down city in the world, and people think everyone was walking around. It's like they would lock.
I've got mates there. I got mates there, so yeah, I didn't know it was the most, but I sensed. Yeah. I mean, it was pretty crazy, pretty draconian.
So I'm kind of interested in those things that you said, that what was strange, because I think strange is a useful word. It doesn't mean, it's like silence. We think that means something bad. I think strange doesn't mean it's just unusual, or it means that we can't immediately put our finger on what something is. It can be something that's intriguing, right?
Well,
humans strange for you?
Adapt very, very fast, right? What's strange? I mean, the inability to travel, strange might not even be the right word. I've got used to it, but for me, I feel like, having freedom taken away is something that, is, and I know that I think would be the theme that has most annoyed people, is this feeling of having certain freedoms taken away. I'd never considered. Now, I also realize how lucky I am in the past to be able to travel, because many people don't even have that luxury based on their passport and everything else. So I've always had it as a given that I can just, book a flight, get on a plane. I've got 2 passports. So strange probably isn't the right word. It was strange because I hadn't really thought about it enough. But
I don't know. I think it's.
But also,
it's
my situation of living
sometimes.
living in my living environment, which is great, is also, off the beaten track, off grid. That I was always that was always balanced with traveling a lot. So it was great to get back here. Now, there's been kind of 18 months that we didn't really leave at all. There was one point where we couldn't go over the border into Chiang Mai. So strange, because I was like, wow, it became an island here. So yeah, that was how that was the word I used without really thinking about it, which might be the right descriptive. I don't know.
Yeah. Do you think that how things have changed, has that, because you were already into the podcasts before that, but do you think that how things have changed, that's made it more important for you to do this?
Oh, without doubt. Yeah. I mean, I actually started this podcast during lockdown because it helped me just to keep sane. It was like, I have a reason to have conversations. I mean, it'd be very odd if I was just randomly approaching people I didn't know and saying, hey, do you want to jump on a call for 45 minutes? But which obviously we know each other. But the fact is,
that's a good idea.
If you approach someone and say, hey, I love what you do you want to chat about it for 45 minutes? They're going to talk to you. But from a personal point of view, it was, as much about just keeping up connections with people whilst being kind of off-road, off-grid on the locked-in island. So yeah, that is how I kind of started. My personal motivation was because I want to just keep my sanity intact, because I'm very social and enjoy talking to people. But maybe I should have approached it that way. Hey, just random strangers, do you want a 45-minute conversation?
Yeah. But I mean, it's, but it's kind of interesting because, like I was saying about the neighborhoods thing, it was a little bit random the way, because the call went out and there was a certain amount of interest in the theme and people stitching their work to it. But
you're almost pitching the metaverse, by the way. You're almost kind of pitching the metaverse, which I don't. For me, the name just kind of, it doesn't make me excited. But is it something you're excited about?
You'd have to tell me what it is, because I don't.
Well, Facebook's changed its name to Meta, and
right,
and the kind of future of this kind of connecting within the web and virtually connecting. I mean, it's kind of the way you're talking is this kind of metaverse.
Right,
kind of future.
It's interesting. I think so. I call it something else. I can tell you, I've been on Facebook less during the lockdown. I don't go on there that much, but I've been on there even less.
That's good. Have you drunk more red wine or drunk less red wine?
Oh, that's not a fair question, because I'm in Australia, and I'm living in Thailand, where I'm living. I put on the quarantones. I'll tell you, being locked down the last 14 or 16 weeks, whatever it was. Oh no, I think I just put on weight anyway because my diet has changed here. But of course, wine is nice, and Australia has a lot of good wine,
and it's cheap. The good cheap wine in Australia versus Thailand, where it's expensive.
Prohibitive in Thailand. It's so expensive, given what you earn. You don't, and you look at what was 300 baht a bottle for a bottle of Rumours white wine or whatever you buy in Chiang Mai. It's like $15. It's like $3 a bottle in Australia. It's like you barely cook with it. Like, so I mean, yes. I'm going into making cocktails, actually. I'm ashamed. But also, I'm also kind of proud in a sort of dirtier kind of underbelly way. Because if I was upstairs, I would show you my bar. But it's like...
Oh, we have to do the next chat from the bar. That sounds good.
That's right. No, it's kind of... So I was mixing cocktails for a while. But not mass... I think everybody's a bit careful about that. But I think, I think like I think what's interesting is, though, that I don't go on Facebook, and I think that's another thing is that, we've gone through that process of looking how complicit and how kind of connected and but also how problematic social media is. And then the shift, of course, away from WhatsApp. Right? I don't know, but I mean, a lot of people just who knew what Signal was?
Yeah, we used to, I use Telegram all the time. It's the same thing. I mean,
Well, I interestingly use Telegram too for an online sort of writing.
But it has the same benefits as Signal in terms of being outside of the WhatsApp. Hey, we're taking your, we're taking your data, etc.
So I think just generally that thing about. I'm also here's the other thing. What's changed? The talk about work from home culture. I've always worked from home. I've always worked. That's what I do, unless I'm delivering face to face somewhere, a workshop or a project, or I'm making a piece of theatre and putting it on the road or whatever we're doing. But a lot of my work, and particularly online, I do from home anyway, and I like it that way. So, some people, I don't know. I actually sort of happy about that other people have had the chance to experience that, and that it's become more normative, because I like being able to work from home, and I think I think that for people who want it, it's nice that they've been able to experience it, and around people who have got kids, and it's just like, I think sort of rethinking this very rigid ideas about like getting up, getting the kit on, going to this place, the office, to work, do this and do that. I think, like, why? Because in Asia, ideas of like being alive and working and being with your friends and having a good time in Thailand, you talk about things being sanduk, right? When you live there, you take it for granted. But things overlap. It's not about what you do, it's how you do it, right? It's about atmosphere. So, and I just sort of think we're kind of collapsing some of those very rigid sort of structures around work and home life. I mean, you've got, other people say, oh, but I want to keep them separate. It's like, well, if we work differently. So I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, because there's this kind of, the jury's out a bit, right? Isn't it? Some people say the work from home thing is better. Some people say it's not. Some people say we're more productive. Some people say we're less. Some people say I have more control over my work. Some people say no, I'm just like battered by Zoom fatigue.
I think, I've got a pretty clear. I mean, for me, it's all pretty clear. I think there's a hybrid model that makes sense. I mean, from a personal situation, if you're a small business and a couple of people, 3 or 4 people, it doesn't really matter. I don't think it comes into it. But for larger companies, I think the hybrid model makes absolute sense. I mean, I won't mention them, but an organization that we do work with made a kind of drastic, they're big, they made a kind of drastic call. Everyone's working from home, and they had like a semi-revolution against that, because a lot of people are like, no, I need some time in the office. So they've kind of said, well, the hybrid model where you can work from home if you want, and we will have specific time in the office for specific reasons. Yeah, because also I think it's really important to get people together now and then. I mean, I think you can't get away from that. And, there's the social element of collaboration, seeing each other in person. I think it's an important part of the working relationship, and it needs to happen now and then. I don't think you can just, you can do it. You can have a fully remote model, but it also, there's a lot of dependencies on what type of business and, the work you do. And we work in work that you can do remotely. A lot of people, there are needs to be physically there. I mean, so that's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, it really depends, doesn't it? I mean, I think, like I said, with the going back to doing the face-to-face, there's a certain kind of intimacy that gets produced. But I think it was also that last workshop we ran was particularly, or sort of training, was particularly interesting because I think there was almost a kind of reverence in the room, like it's starting to kind of and theatre is a lot about ritual, right? And the ritualization of space and how you set up certain sort of patterns around and ways of behaving, right? And they're kind of dilated. And it was kind of interesting going into that space because people showed up. Some of the work we were doing was on being present, and they already were. They came into the room present because there was a kind of a moment of respect, I think, for that ability to be able to be together, breathing in the same room, you know, and without a mask and so on and so forth. And one of the first activities I sort of do in that workshop is we kind of share stories about our names. And they're funny stories about our nicknames and like what people call us when we're naughty. And whatever it is, you know, that you say, or a lot of it has to do with legacy and ancestry. And I think in Australia, you know, it's a land of migrants, of immigrants. And we said sort of people with different kinds of status and its effects. But most people, you know, who are not from the indigenous communities, of course, there's some kind of legacy there. And it is in people's names. But then it was just the level of sharing that happened, the commitment to sharing. It was so high, Matt. It was like, and it's moving, right? I mean, it's emotional for people, and you know, you make friends really fast. Like one of the pieces of feedback was this. One of the guys wrote, and it was very good. But I'm conscious that I think the way we do it is good, but I also think it was a special moment. One of the guys wrote and just kind of said that at the end it was really difficult just saying goodbye. And we kind of like these classic kind of stories around really great team building sessions where, you know, you get together and, you know, things really happen. But it was genuinely about like people forming relationships with one another and getting to know each other, and the fact that they were a very diverse group of people, but they went through this experience together that no one is taking for granted anymore.
Awesome. And on that poignant note, because I'm running out of time, we were going to do a 20-minute power pod on change. We've gone for 45, chatting about all sorts. So
there you are.
So it's good to catch up. All those years ago, we met randomly on a plane. So yeah, it's I'm glad to see you well.
Yeah, I doubt we'll run out of things to talk about.
Indeed, we need to do a chat from the bar at some point.
All right. Well, I'll let you. Can you stop the record button? And then I'll talk to you about. So I wanted to ask you something else.
Awesome. All right. Knocking off for the audience.
To do what we want to do.
Muhammad Ali and Sonny Barger, the president of the Hells Angels.
This is 1095.